If you are reading this, I need you to slow down for a minute. Not tomorrow, not next week, right now. Because the thing that quietly ruins most people's lives does not arrive loudly. It does not knock on the door. It does not send a warning text. It just settles in slowly, like dust on furniture you forgot to clean. And one day you look around and realize you cannot breathe. My name is Walter Briggs. I am 91 years old. For 31 years, I worked at a self-storage facility just outside of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Not the kind you see in fancy commercials. Ours had rust on the gates and gravel in the parking lot. The wind never stopped blowing across those rows of metal doors. I was not a financial advisor. I was not a psychologist. I was not a life coach. I was the man who cut locks off abandoned storage units. That was my job. When someone stopped paying their bill for long enough, I would snap the lock, roll up the door, and take inventory before the auction buyers came in. And let me tell you something. People lie to everyone else in their lives, but they do not lie to storage units. Because whatever they could not let go of, whatever they were not ready to face, whatever version of themselves they were trying to preserve, it ended up in a 10 by 10 metal box. And after 3 decades of opening those boxes, I started seeing patterns, especially in people in their 50s. Let me explain. You can tell a lot about a person by what they keep when they run out of room. The young folks, their units were messy, random furniture, broken lamps, boxes of clothes they outgrew, temporary chaos. You could feel they were still building something. The older folks in their 70s and 80s, their units were small, organized, practical, just what they needed. But the 50-year-olds, that was different. That was where the ghosts lived. I opened one unit that belonged to a man named Craig, 52 years old, 2 months behind on payments. Inside was a full drum set, professional grade, wrapped carefully in moving blankets. Alongside it were framed band posters from the 1980s, all featuring his name in bold print. Craig had been in a band once, played local bars, dreamed of something bigger. The drums had not been touched in at least 15 years. The sticks were still taped together with a yellowing rubber band. When I called him about the overdue balance, he said, "Go ahead and auction it. I don't need that stuff anymore." But the pause before he said it told me he did. He just did not believe he was allowed to anymore. That is what your 50s do to you. They convince you that who you used to be was a phase, a hobby, a distraction from the real responsibilities. And so you pack that version of yourself into a storage unit and pay a monthly fee to avoid deciding whether to let it live or let it die. I saw it again and again. Scrapbooks from unfinished marriages, boxes of baby clothes from children who no longer visited, business inventory from side projects that were going to take off any day now. But here's what really shook me. The regret was always louder than the failure. There was a woman, Teresa, 55. Her unit was filled with bakery equipment, industrial mixers, cake stands, custom molds shaped like roses and wedding bells. She once ran a small cake business from her kitchen. It had grown enough that she considered renting a storefront. Then her husband got nervous, said it was risky, said they should focus on stability. So she shut it down, packed everything into storage just in case. For 9 years she paid that monthly bill. 9 years of almost. When she finally stopped paying, I called her. She said quietly, "I guess if I haven't done it by now, I never will." That sentence stuck with me harder than anything I ever saw. Because it was not true. But she believed it. And belief is stronger than reality. Your 50s are dangerous because they sit right in the middle of possibility and surrender. You are still healthy enough to try. Still young enough to pivot. Still sharp enough to learn. But you are tired. And tired people convince themselves that comfort is wisdom. Let me tell you about something else I noticed. Divorce units. Yes, that is what we called them. Whenever a couple split up in their 50s, one of them usually rented a storage unit. Half a house would end up inside. Dining tables, recliners, framed wedding photos turned backward. But what fascinated me was this. The items that made it into storage were rarely the practical ones. They kept the microwave. They kept the mattress, but they stored the sentimental things. Photo albums, love letters, souvenirs from vacations taken when they still liked each other. It was like they were not ready to let go of the idea of what the marriage had been, even if they could not stand what it had become. And that is what I need you to understand. By the time you reach your 50s, you are no longer choosing between right and wrong. You are choosing between honest and comfortable. And most people choose comfortable. They store their dissatisfaction. They store their unrealized dreams. They store their apologies. They store the conversations they should have had. And every month they pay for it. Maybe not to a storage facility, but in quiet resentment, in low-grade sadness, in that dull feeling that something is missing but you cannot quite name it. I am 91 years old. I have opened over 4,000 storage units. And I can tell you this with certainty. The saddest units were not the ones filled with junk. They were the ones filled with potential. The unopened photography equipment. The language learning tapes still sealed in plastic. The camping gear bought after watching one inspirational documentary and then never used. The 50s are when people start shrinking their lives to fit what feels safe. They stop expanding. They stop risking embarrassment. They stop risking failure. And they call it maturity. But maturity is not the same thing as surrender. In the next part, I'm going to tell you what happened at the auctions, what people fought over, what nobody wanted, and what that taught me about time. Because once you see how strangers bid on the leftovers of someone else's almost life, you will never look at your own unfinished business the same way again. And if you are in your 50s right now, I hope you are paying attention. Because the clock does not shout. It whispers. And by the time it gets loud, the door is already closing. The auctions were always on Saturdays, 9 in the morning, rain or shine. Buyers would gather outside the gate, resellers, antique hunters, young couples hoping to find treasure, and a few regulars who treated it like a sport. They would bring coffee in paper cups and fold their arms against the wind, waiting for me to unlock the first door. There is a particular sound a metal storage door makes when it rolls up. It rattles, echoes, announces itself, and every time I lifted one, it felt like opening a chapter someone else never finished writing. Here is what most people do not understand about storage auctions. You are not selling objects. You are selling decisions that were postponed too long. The buyers would step forward, squinting into the dark unit. You are not allowed to walk inside. You stand at the threshold and look. 10 seconds. That is all they get. 10 seconds to decide what someone else's unfinished life is worth. I watched men bid aggressively over tool collections, power saws, drill presses, neatly organized hardware. Usually belong to men in their 50s who once planned to renovate something. A basement, a boat, a dream cabin by the lake. Projects that never started. The irony? The buyers often gutted the sets, resold the valuable pieces, and threw the rest away. All that intention reduced to yard sale inventory. But the real lessons were not in what sold high. They were in what nobody wanted. I remember one unit clearly. It belonged to a schoolteacher named Harold, 57 years old. Passed away unexpectedly, heart attack. His children did not want to deal with the unit, so it went to auction. Inside were dozens of carefully labeled boxes, travel plans, business ideas, book outline drafts, retirement goals. He had mapped out everything. Spreadsheets printed neatly, brochures from hiking tours, notes for a novel he intended to write once he had more time. The buyers looked bored. One man whispered, "Looks like paperwork." Bidding started at $50. No one moved. I dropped it to $25. Still nothing. Finally, a young reseller shrugged and said, $10. Sold. $10. 30 years of future plans. $10. I stood there holding the clipboard, and something inside me shifted. Because Harold had not been irresponsible. He had been preparing. But he prepared so long that he forgot to begin. And that, I learned, is the quiet trap of your 50s. You start organizing your dreams instead of living them. You research. You outline. You calculate. You wait for the right season. But seasons do not send invitations. They pass. Let me tell you about something else I saw at those auctions. The fitness units. Yes, even in storage facilities. Entire units packed wall-to-wall with treadmills, ellipticals, weight benches. Bought during moments of motivation. stored after moments of discouragement. One buyer once joked, "January is my favorite time of year." Everyone laughed, but I did not, because I knew those machines represented something deeper. They were not about fitness. They were about redemption. People in their 50s look back and realize they neglected themselves for decades. Career, kids, bills, responsibilities. So they try to reclaim control in one big, dramatic purchase. But when the results are not instant, they quietly quit. And instead of adjusting the effort, they store the evidence. Out of sight, out of mind, until they cannot afford the unit anymore. That is when I saw the truth clearly. Your 50s are not about starting over. They are about finishing honestly. Finishing conversations you avoided. Finishing habits that are slowly killing you. Finishing the resentment you have been feeding for years. Because if you do not finish them, someone else will one day stand in front of a metal door and sell them for pennies. I also noticed something else. The brave ones. They were rare, but unforgettable. There was a woman named Lillian, 54. She rented a unit for only 6 months. Inside, old office furniture, filing cabinets, framed certificates from a corporate job she left after 22 years. When she stopped by to clear it out before auction, I asked if she wanted help loading the truck. She smiled. "No auction," she said. "I'm done storing who I was." She had taken a lower-paying job at a nonprofit. Smaller paycheck. Bigger smile. She did not store the dream. She acted on it. That is the difference. Most people in their 50s think they are running out of time. But what they are really running out of is tolerance. Tolerance for discomfort. Tolerance for being beginners. Tolerance for uncertainty. So they cling tighter to what feels stable, even if it makes them miserable. And misery, when stored long enough, becomes identity. By the time people hit their 60s, I could tell who had used their 50s well. They rented smaller units, simpler units, temporary units. They were not hoarding possibilities. They were living them. The ones who ignored that decade, their units grew larger, more crowded, heavier, full of things they meant to deal with someday. I am 91 years old now. I have more years behind me than ahead. And if there is one thing those auctions taught me, it is this. Strangers will always be willing to bid on your leftovers. But no one will ever bid on your unused time. There is no auction for that. No buyer. No resale value. No second chance. In part 3, I'm going to tell you what I did differently after I understood all this, and what I wish every person standing in the middle of their life would finally admit to themselves before it is too late. Because the storage unit is not the problem. The lock is not the problem. The problem is what you are postponing, and whether you are brave enough to roll up the door yourself before someone else has to. After enough Saturdays at those auctions, after enough $10 dreams and unopened futures, I went home one evening and sat in my truck long after my shift had ended. The sun was setting behind the rows of metal buildings. The wind had died down for once. Everything was quiet, and I realized something that unsettled me. I had spent 31 years cutting other people's locks, but I had never opened my own. That thought followed me home. It sat with me at dinner. It followed me into bed. It stayed with me for weeks. Because if I was honest, truly honest, I had my own version of a storage unit. Not the kind with a metal door. The kind you build inside yourself. I had always wanted to travel outside Oklahoma. Nothing extravagant. Just to see the ocean once. I had told myself it was impractical. Too expensive. Too unnecessary. I had wanted to learn woodworking beyond basic repairs. I used to admire handcrafted tables and think I could try that. But I never did. Why? Because I was busy. Because I was practical. Because it did not seem urgent. And that is the most dangerous word in your 50s and 60s. Not urgent. The heart attack is urgent. The diagnosis is urgent. The foreclosure notice is urgent. But the dream? The apology? The risk? Those whisper. They wait. And if you ignore them long enough, they stop whispering. That night in my truck, I made a quiet decision. I would not become one of my own auctions. I was 62 at the time. Not young. Not old. Right in that middle stretch where you still have strength, but start to feel time pressing on your back. The next week, I took 3 days off and drove south until I hit the Gulf of Mexico. I had never seen that much water in my life. When I stepped onto the sand, I felt something loosen in my chest. It was not dramatic. No lightning bolt. No grand revelation. Just a small, steady realization. I should have done this sooner. Not because it was expensive. Not because it was glamorous. But because I had turned something simple into something impossible in my head. That is what we do in our 50s. We inflate the cost of change. We exaggerate the risk. We convince ourselves that starting now is foolish because we did not start earlier. And so we store it. Let me tell you what else I learned after that trip. Change does not require a dramatic reinvention. It requires a decision to stop postponing. When I came back, I signed up for a beginner woodworking class at the community center. I was the oldest person there. My first project was crooked. My measurements were wrong. I sanded one edge so unevenly it looked chewed. And I almost quit. Because embarrassment feels sharper when you are older. When you are 22, being bad at something is expected. When you are 62, you feel like you are not supposed to be new anymore. But I remember Craig's drum set, Teresa's bakery equipment, Harold's neatly labeled boxes, and I stayed. 6 months later, I built a small side table. Nothing extraordinary, but it was mine. Not stored, not postponed, not auctioned, finished. And here is what I want you to understand if you are in your 50s right now. You do not need to blow up your life. You do not need to quit your job tomorrow, or empty your savings account or move across the country. You need to stop lying to yourself about someday. Someday is not a plan. It is a storage unit. You say, I will deal with my health someday. I will fix that relationship someday. I will start that thing someday. And the rent on someday increases every year. Physically, emotionally, financially. I saw men in their 70s trying to lift boxes they should have dealt with 20 years earlier. I saw families arguing in parking lots about what to keep and what to throw away because the person who owned it never made the decision themselves. Do you know what the most peaceful units looked like? They were almost empty. Not because the person had nothing, but because they did not need to store their life. They dealt with it as they went. They had conversations when they were uncomfortable. They downsized when it made sense. They gave things away while they were still alive to see the joy on someone's face. They did not cling. That is the gift of your 50s. You still have enough strength to carry what matters, but you also have enough experience to recognize what does not. Let me be plain with you. If you are in your 50s and your body hurts in ways you pretend not to notice, go get it checked. If you are in your 50s and you have not spoken to your sibling over something small that turned into something large, call them. If you are in your 50s and your marriage feels like a quiet business partnership, talk before it becomes a legal one. If you are in your 50s and there is a version of you that still knocks on the inside of your chest at night, listen. Because here is the truth no one likes to say out loud. The window does not slam shut at 60. It narrows. At 70, it narrows again. At 80, you are mostly looking through it instead of climbing through it. I am 91 years old. I no longer cut locks. My hands shake too much for that. But I still think about those doors. I think about how heavy they sounded when they rolled up. How final it felt when the gavel dropped at the auction. Sold. That word echoes in my head sometimes. Sold. As if a chapter can be transferred to someone else. But your time cannot. Your health cannot. Your relationships cannot. Your unfinished courage cannot. Those either get lived by you, or they disappear. There is no resale market for regret. And I am not telling you this to frighten you. I am telling you this because I watched thousands of people assume they had more runway than they did. They were not reckless. They were not foolish. They were simply certain that tomorrow would cooperate. Tomorrow does not cooperate. It arrives, and then it leaves. If you are standing in the middle of your life right now, not young, not old, this is not your decline. This is your sorting season. Decide what stays. Decide what goes. Decide what you are finally going to use instead of store. Open the door yourself. Do not wait for a stranger with a clipboard to do it for you. Because once the bidding starts, it is too late to say, actually, I changed my mind. You do not get a receipt for unused years. You only get memory. And I hope when you reach my age, your memories are not of things you meant to do. I hope they are worn. scratched, used up completely, like a tool that did its job, like a door that was opened on purpose, not because someone else had to cut the lock.